Hi, and welcome to our monthly live video pastors chat. My name's Steve Brown. I'm the old white guy. I just kind of sit around and go along for the fun. My pastor Kevin is here. My semi-pastor Zach is here. In the little glass booth is Eric. He is not my pastor, but working on it. And Pete, my former pastor, is here. And we're sitting around the table, and we're talking to one of my favorite people in the world, a lady who absolutely blows me away. When I do lab classes at the seminary, I judge a student by how often I say, I don't believe I would have said that. The more I say, I don't believe I would have said that, the higher the grade goes. And Shari would get straight A's. I mean, every time I read something she says or hear something she speaks, I think, I don't believe I'd have said that. And that's because she gets grace so deeply and profoundly. She's married to John, who's a church planting pastor. She's the founder and director of Parakaleo, a ministry dedicated to equipping and supporting pastor's wife. You can go to PARAKALEO.us. You can find out all kinds of good things about that. She's the co-author of Beyond Duct Tape, Holding the Heart Together in a Life of Ministry. And she also, and this is very important, is one of the featured speakers at the Key Life Pastors Pre-Conference at Liberate 2015. And Eric will be saying something about that. Where can they go and they can get some information on that?
Liberate2015.com. It's as easy as that. All the information's there. And special pricing through December 14th, so go soon.
Oh, man, they're going to line up after this live feed. I just want you to know that. The theme for Liberate 2015 is It Is Finished. Just a quiz. Who said that? and
Jesus is always the answer. Jesus is the answer.
A squirrel, a little gray
what's
squirrel.
That old story? I had what has a fluffy tail and stores nuts? And the kid says, I know sounds like a squirrel, but I know it's Jesus. He's the answer to everything. The Key Life Pastors pre-conference It Is Finished too, and Shari's going to be answering the question, is it finished for your relationships? And we're going to talk a little bit about that later. But Shari, tell us a little bit about your story. I mean, you break every mold there is, and you stay within biblical standards properly defined. Tell us a little bit about you and your story.
Well, I'm sitting here wondering, wow, is that really true? Do I stay within the right? I was raised in a ministry family. We grew up in the Caribbean as missionaries, and then my husband and I went into missions. And in God's grace, He placed us in a culture that would not put up with my BS. Basically, I thought I knew how to do this Christian life thing. And just to sum it up, one woman one day came to me and she goes, basically what you're selling us, you're asking us really to trade one form of bondage for another.
Whoa.
And I had to say, you're right, but this is all I know. So just to say in a nutshell, I started having so many questions and realizing all of the things that I had seen in Scripture weren't really true for my life. I was working really hard. and I felt God owed me a lot. So all of that, just that whole the three little kids, the tension, the pressure. I just said, there must be something wrong. I thought it was something wrong with Christianity, of course, at the time. Didn't realize that I was placing everything in. All my eggs were in the basket of how good or how right I could do it.
And you had a nervous breakdown?
Actually,
you turned to
close
booze,
to
right?
No, I threw my Bible out the window.
That sounds like you. BS. You don't say that on a Christian broadcast, Shari. And you don't confess to throwing your Bible out the window. You just don't do things like that. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, it was that, or I was so desperate. I was like, why live? If Christianity isn't true, if everything about this isn't true, why keep on with this? So I did quit Christianity. But my husband was still a missionary, so that was a little bit difficult at the time.
Put that in your missionary letter and see what your supporters say.
Right. But basically, God, again, brought us to a place where I started experiencing people really loving me and not afraid of my honesty and my questions. And then it was really kind of like a dare with God. It was sort of like, okay, if this is really true, when I started, the scripture started coming to my mind because my Bible was thrown out. And then I started kind of getting on my mom in my head thinking she made me memorize all these verses and now they're coming back to my head. I can't get rid of them. But basically it was just, okay, if this is true, I'm going to try it. And so I said, I'm going to try it by quitting everything I'm doing. And that was the beginning.
Oh, man. Did that present political problems for your husband?
Well, I think by that time we were already either kicked out or on the way of being kicked out. So,
what were you, fired as a missionary? Good heavens, Shari.
Well, pretty much, yeah.
All right, go ahead.
Well, so during that limbo time, basically is when what was good was being out of the limelight.
Yeah.
That's what gave me that space to begin really exploring this truth of, is there really nothing required of me? So I stopped doing a whole list of things, and then I made up a whole list of all the things I had wished I could do that I'd never tried before.
I don't think you ought to list those.
No, I was just going to say. Wait. That's the difference between you and me. I wanted the list.
But the list is actually good. See, this is the thing. We all think it's going to be something wild. I just wanted to learn to dance. I mean, just like, go take classes with my husband and dance.
I was hoping for so much more.
I know. And it's not because I couldn't do that before. Yeah. I was just so busy in ministry that I had never taken time to actually enjoy life.
Oh, man.
So one of the things on the list was swinging on the swing with my daughter. And, once you take everything out of your life that you're supposed to do, there's a lot of extra time.
Oh, yeah. Do you, is that the place of pain for most pastors and their families?
Time?
Yeah,
or not?
No, exactly what you just described. We're so busy trying to please God and be religious that we don't have time to sit on a swing with our kids.
That is one of them. Yes, that is a huge one.
Did you, at the end of that year, did that make you radical? I mean, you said after I'd introduced you, you're sitting there thinking whether, is that true? Yeah, it's true in spades. You say things nobody will say. Did you come out of that year like an explosion of grace, or did you test it a little bit with God's people?
Well, first of all, it wasn't a year. It was longer.
Listen, you can only swing on a swing so many times. Okay.
But I had promised my husband the one thing I would never do would be in ministry with him again. So,
That's got to make him. That really is it's an affirming thing you said to your husband.
Thanks a lot, honey. What am I going to do now?
Yeah, we're going to another church. I'm going to another church. I don't know what church you're going to go to, but
well, that's kind of like what it was. If you want to be a pastor, that's fine. Just don't let anybody know you have a wife and family. I'm not going. I wouldn't say it was an explosion of grace. Obviously, if I'm talking like that, that's not an explosion of grace. It was slow.
Yeah.
Really slow. A slow process.
You do, and you discovered, I'm assuming there's a happy ending to this. You discovered this really is true, that you really don't have to please God, right?
Right. But this is the thing. My first real test of it was going, if this is true, I can fight God. So in other words, it's like, it's kind of like we test the water, so to speak. And that was so refreshing for me to think, okay, I don't have to do, I don't have to do grace right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, I can wrestle with God. So it did, before I didn't have the courage to even try that.
Yeah.
So after you had it out with him, how did you end up making those little moves back into ministry with your husband? Because you're now the wife of a church planting pastor.
And all you do is ministry.
Yeah, you got parakaleo. And
you don't have time to get on a swing with your daughter anymore.
Yeah, I'm thinking, like, how's your hip?
Yeah, right. I was thinking the same thing.
God has a way, get back in the mix.
Well, this is the thing is, I regularly go through, like, okay, I just want to go sit on the beach for the rest of my life and do nothing. And so there are times I do that. Like, I just go, okay, I've forgotten what this is all about. Like sieves. It seeps through us all the time.
That is so true.
So, no, it's not. I mean, all the time, every single day, I have to be reminded of the truth. So I wouldn't say it's like, okay, got that, and now the rest of life is hunky-dory.
Yeah, it doesn't work that way. Don't you wish it did? That would be so good. Do you, you do, I was being facetious to a degree when I was kidding you about, I don't believe I'd have said that, but you are pretty much in your face. And we are members, or at least some of us, 3 of us in this room, are members of a very conservative, fairly straight-laced, let's be good, nice, pure, and sweet kind of denomination. You break out of that mold. What kind of reaction do you get? Joy, anger, criticism?
Yes.
Yeah, that's right.
Next question.
People think I'm wonderful. And if you believe that, you'll believe anything.
Well, and I think sometimes, like in my they'll think, you're just trying to get a reaction. I'm like, no, I'm really not. I think half the time I'm not thinking about what I'm saying. I'm not saying it to get a reaction. I'm not realizing it's causing a reaction half the time.
Tell us, go ahead, Eric.
Well, I'm still wondering how you ended up back in ministry. I mean, what was the process? What was the progression?
Okay.
Because would you guys just need the money?
Yeah, right.
Okay.
No, Eric, a sinner can repent, but stupid's forever.
I mean, I'm seeing 2 very different Sharys, the one that's running parakaleo and the one that's, swinging on the beach.
Okay. What brought us back in, my husband was actually right now, he's the global trainer for church planting for City to City Redeemer. So that's why we're in New York. But what got us back into ministry was we said, if this is so true, if this is true, we want to start a church and let other people know that it can be different, that
That's how he gets you.
And that's what got us back in.
Did
Yeah.
John walk through this with? I mean, I'd be interested in his story. Did he go through some of the trauma that you went through, or was he just the steady rock?
He should probably get on the show sometime. I probably shouldn't answer for him.
Okay, you don't have to. I just wondered. I'll ask him sometime.
Okay.
Because I'd be really interested. Listen, tell us a little bit about the ministry that you have with pastors' wives, and then I'm sure these guys have questions too. I want to get into those too.
Well, basically, it started as we got back into starting a church. Again, all of the same things came crashing in. Now, the conditions hadn't changed out there. And so that's why Parakaleo was started, because really what I wanted to do is create, and which is what we do, is create relational space for women so that they can encounter a robust gospel and really be freed to accept and live out of their true identity.
Mm. It's hard.
So
that's hard. It's hard to be a pastor's wife, isn't it?
Oh yeah, it is. Even with the best of congregations.
Yeah. I agree. Go ahead. You were saying, so how did this get started? You were just speaking at pastors' wives settings and decided, go ahead.
No. I was, the organization or the denomination that we work for, they do assessing of church planting couples.
Yeah.
And so basically what I did was, I was speaking at one of those events and had to turn the mic off because every woman in the room was crying, just hearing about the difficulties. So that's why I went to the head at that time and just said, okay, we've got to do something. This is wrong. Why are we starting churches when our women are dying on the vine?
Mm.
So basically out of that, it's how it got started.
Now, your ministry goes beyond the denominational boundaries, doesn't it? You talk to a lot of
Yes. Yeah, we work with, we have women from all different denominations and organizations. And we also, we're also international now.
Right.
That's awesome. Hey, Shari, this is Pete. I was a church planting pastor too, and I guess and went through the assessing process, and it was so long ago. I got through the assessment without my wife there, so that was one of the rare.
That's why she's a Buddhist.
I know, I know, really. So, do you find that a lot of I brought her kicking and screaming into being a pastor's wife and church planting pastor at that. Do you find that that's common, that a lot of pastors kind of pull their wives into it and they don't really want it to be a pastor's wife or a church planting pastor's wife? Or are most of the pastors pretty good at negotiating with their wife on that subject?
Well, things have changed now where we do have both husband and wife have to go through assessment. And one of the things that we look for is the guy actually dragging her and pulling her into this. Because I think, but what's so hard is as women, I mean, we want our husbands to do well. We don't want to be the ones to say, hey, it's my fault that he doesn't get to follow his dream. So it's really hard for us to go, sure, I want you to do that, but what is that going to mean for me? So there's a lot. I think it's a hard process. There are some who really come at it. They're both really wanting to do it, but I don't know percentages.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, that's good. I'm glad I'm not the only one.
Yeah.
Well,
my
you
wife,
had a crisis. You had a crisis in your family, didn't you, Pete?
Yeah, we did.
I mean, there was just a time when she just, and when you tell that story, I think, ooh. But it was, yeah.
But she kind of went through kind of what Shari was saying was what wife wants to tell her husband not to do what they feel God calls them to do and what their dream is. Yeah, I could have waited too and waited until God changed her heart or changed my heart.
Yeah.
But, we pull them along sometimes.
You were saying something. I'm sorry, Zach.
Oh, I was just going to say when I got my first interview for the church I'm now at, my wife's first reaction was, "No way in hell are we doing that." And so it took her about 5 months, and I wasn't going to make the move until she was ready. But in 5 months, she was convinced that's where awesome. God wanted us. But for her, she grew up as a pastor's kid, so she didn't want for our kids what she experienced as a kid in a pastor's family, being in that bubble, having everyone kind of critiquing your behavior, and so I was just wondering, as far as do you have children, or Shari?
Oh, yes, have 3. They're now all adults.
Yeah. So I would love, because our kids are still pretty young. They're all elementary school age right now. What's some advice you would give to us pastors who have young kids, as far as raising our kids in that bubble?
Well, one thing that we did or tried to do, maybe after some of not doing it this way the first time around, but letting our kids know that if there are certain things they can or can't do because of their dad's job, we would talk about it as his job instead of because it's the church or he's a pastor or, that type of thing. And so because we wanted them to have the idea, there's certain things kids can't do if their dad's a lawyer, or maybe not as much, but there is some of that. So that was one thing. But the other thing was we pretty much let our kids express themselves. Like if we were going to let our daughter wear something, she would wear it to church or wear it, any place else. We wouldn't say, "Oh, well, you just can't do that at church." So we tried to keep that consistency.
You tried to make them normal, and it's not a normal job. It's a hard job to keep people normal, right. And to make family at home normal is a hard road to walk. So I think, Shari, and you might agree or you may not, I think at least in that one area, it's a little bit easier today than when I started, maybe even when you started in ministry. I think there was a time in the church where it was clearly understood that you didn't hire the pastor by himself. You hired his wife too, and the children were assistant ministers in that, and they were expected to live in a certain way and do certain things. As I went through pastoral ministry over a lot of years, that lightened up. Now, it may have lightened up because I was the meanest preacher in the valley, and I just didn't let anybody mess with that. But I think the culture changed a bit. Do you find that true or not?
Well, I think it depends probably on where you're a pastor, and because just even the United States, there's so many different cultures. So, and it probably depends on that and the denomination and type of church a person's in. But I would say, so maybe there's not as much pressure as there was, or expectations in that sense that you're hiring the wife. But I think by saying, okay, we're not hiring your wife. I used to get those things. We're not hiring your wife. And yet there were all the hidden things that everybody expected. And so I think that's almost hard. Well, I can't say because I didn't know the other way, but that's so hard because there's no one saying what is expected. And yet you find it out when people are upset at you.
So for people looking in from the outside, what are some of those hidden expectations?
Well,
president of the women in the church first.
Well, even move back just a little bit and even think, she has no option of choosing what church she wants to go to. So she has to go to that church. Even, we're just taking for granted that that's the church she wants to go to. Well, let's say that's not where she's going to worship. Well, maybe she has a really hard time hearing her husband preach. A lot of women have a hard time with that. They just, probably most of the guys don't know it.
Ooh.
But,
Ouch.
well, I'm not.
Oh, man.
I'm going to need a minute. Shari, stop. I'm just going to need a minute.
Coffee break. Hey, I want to talk about that somehow. Oh, man.
I want to hear it, too. My wife says I do a great job.
Do you know, Shari, do you know John Leonard, who's in the Philadelphia area? He was a professor at Westminster and started the church. And Christy, who is his wife, and I love those guys a lot, One time they had a fight before church, and she refused to go. And he turned it into an illustration. He said, "You will note my wife's not here today." She told me as I walked out the door that it would be cold and a hot place for she would go to that church and listen to a hypocrite preach to him. And he used it to teach grace, and it really worked. But at any rate, go ahead. I interrupted you. I just wanted to say that.
I mean, it's things like that. It's not so much that she doesn't like your preaching, but you think when you've had an argument, when you're not seeing it lived out at home, I mean, it's not so much that that's happening all the time, but that makes it harder. But also, like now, okay, this is the first time in my life I've ever had an option of choosing what church to go to.
Yeah.
Because my husband's not in church. And I've been amazed at what I've discovered about myself. Well, I'm in my 50s, and most other people find out those things a lot earlier. Like what kind of worship they might like, that's just never been an option.
You know, I have a number of friends who have been in ministry and no longer in ministry, and it's interesting to listen to their wives. Some of them say, "I really miss being, quote, the first lady of the manse." And
right.
Others say, I rode a motorcycle last week, and that's the first time in my life I've ever done that. I wouldn't go back to that place for all the money in the world.
Oh.
That's a mix, isn't it? For some people, it's a positive
Right.
thing, and for others, a really negative thing.
Right. And I hear it on both sides.
Yeah.
It's for a lot of people, that's a hard thing to let go of, for a lot of women, because they had a place.
Yeah.
And they didn't realize how much they enjoyed that until it was gone.
Yeah, that's true. Do you chafe at the comments of people, maybe guys, who put all women in general, but pastors' wives in particular, into the same box instead of seeing the different fingerprints and life prints of women?
You can't see my face. Well, yes, because would all guys want to be put in the same box?
Well, it depends on which box.
Okay.
Yeah,
Is there beer in the box?
And is there television there too, man? Kevin, you had something to say.
Yeah, Shari, I just and you would know more of the dynamics in this, but I've heard repeatedly said over the past couple of years, just the note that especially in our denomination, but as well as others, we're churning out more guys than we have available pulpits on the one end of the vocational arc, but on the other, fewer and fewer guys are going the distance in pastoral ministry. The likelihood that somebody's going to start in pastoral ministry and retire in pastoral ministry is just going down, down, down. Have you seen that in your work? And, to whatever degree you have seen that, kind of what are the takeaways for younger pastors as they're charting out their early marriage and the shape of their ministry? Any comment on that?
Mm-hmm. Well, if you've read Resilient Ministry, which came out in 2013, the number one reason reported from their research pastors are leaving ministry is because of so much of the pressure on the family, on the wife. And so that is one of the reasons I think we're having such a hard time in this arena. But one thing I'd really like to see, and this is one thing we encourage in our denomination, to once a person, if they're starting out with planting a church, that they raise at least $3,000 a year for their wife. Huh. And that's for like her care, her training, her, just for her health. And the reason why I would say that to anybody in ministry, because even though she's not hired, she is going to get a job that comes with it, regardless of how careful we are to set up healthy boundaries, et cetera, because really ministry, it's a calling. It's a calling for both husband and wife. And so it's going to look different for each couple, but most women don't have training for how to negotiate the pitfalls that come with it. So that's one of the things I'm trying to see. I'd like to really see happen.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I found with my wife, because I go home and I'll vent to Kelly, and I'll tell her, I can't believe I got this email today from this person, and and I'll just want her to comfort me, and But then what happens is a lot of times I'll work it out with that person. I'll have the resolution to the situation, but then my wife is never part of that process, and so she goes around kind of carrying all the baggage of everything that's been hurtful to me without any of the reconciliation that happens. And so I'm pretty new to this. It's only been a year and a half now that I've been a pastor, and I just realized I guess I have a question for you. What would you say to a pastor as far as sharing with his wife kind of the hard parts of the job in a situation like that, where maybe she ends up carrying things that she doesn't need to carry?
Well, and again, it's going to depend on each couple, but that's where I think it's so good for pastors to have a mentor, a coach, somebody that they can really, they can tell the emails to, those types of things. So that way, when you get it out with somebody else, then when you're talking with your wife, you can talk about it, but you're not looking to her to be the one. I mean, she doesn't have to hear everything.
Yeah.
Because like I know, because my husband and I have been real together in ministry, there were things that were helpful for me to know. But it was true. I ended up knowing too much, and then I couldn't work it out with people. Yeah. So that's really smart not to put all of that on a wife.
And I suspect that does depend on the individual in that. It's really interesting, the difference between Zach and I. We're wired differently. He said I got reconciled with him, and she doesn't know about the reconciliation. Well, Anna was certain there was no reconciliation. and the problem is she didn't have a gun. If you are a pastor's wife, one of the really hard things, I suspect, or at least it was for us, is that it's a sideline job in terms of the battles that you're involved in. And it's very hard to watch the battle and not be involved in it. And most spouses of pastors, they don't have a gun. They can't get involved in it. So they didn't get to participate in your reconciliation and my continuing battle.
That's right. This is a really tough place to be, I think.
Steve, before we move on, I just want to mention you can join this conversation if you're watching online, 1-888-547-8383. That's 888-54-STEVE. You can also text your question in, 413-4TEXT. That's 413-367-8398. And you can direct your questions to us on Twitter at Key Life Network.
Good.
Hey, Shari, it seems to me as I'm listening and to what you have to say and how Zach responded, because we had that same situation, it seems like pastoral families are so, it depends. What I hear you saying is it depends on the husband, the wife, obviously, and how they're negotiating this thing. What would you say are some, maybe one or two general principles that really ought to apply to every couple, no matter how they're wired? Like the wife might say, I'm really into being a pastor's wife, or she's saying, I'm not. What are some general things you say, pastoral couples have to agree on or work on, or what principles? Is that too general?
Okay. No. I think that's good, but I do think like one key area is when a couple goes into ministry, they're going together, even if she's not really involved, let's say, in the church. So if they're going together, then she should also have a say in the fact of, let's say it's family night and her husband calls and says, oh, I'm so sorry, something's come up. Well, if you've made that commitment to go into ministry together, I think there should be that commitment to this is our time together. And so he should, if he could call her and say, something has come up, what do you think? Should I go ahead and do this, or what? Yeah, so that she has a say in it. Good. So that way, because there are times that you need to go, and it's an emergency. But ministry is always emergencies, So that's where I think you set those, what are going to be your times together as a family? What are going to be your times together as a family? And then in grace, instead of setting it as a rigid, firm boundary, grace is the thing that says, hey, hey, look we were able to do that 2 times this month. Last month we weren't together at all. So you're moving towards those goals of those times together, but you're also making those decisions together. It's not just the husband saying,
I was
like
how
that.
life's going to
That's
live.
good.
along that line, I was one time doing the Let's Get Religious week at Gordon College, and I was meeting with kids who were going into some kind of ministry, and some of them were kids of pastors and missionaries. And one little girl said to me, she said, "Mr. Brown, do you want me to help you?" And I said, "Well, it's obvious I need some help." And she said, "Next time somebody calls and you're having dinner or you're having a family time, and she says you have the voice for it, say loud enough for your kids to hear it, 'I'm sorry, I can't do that. I'm with my kids and my family.'" And she said, "Make sure they hear you say that." I
That's
did
great.
that. That was so cool. That was one of the best pieces of advice I ever got. And my kids remember that. They remember me saying that often. And I got it from a pastor's daughter.
Awesome.
Go
great.
ahead, Shari. You were given the list in answer to Pete's question about some general principles. The first one I just wrote down. It's too late for me, but I'm going to kill it.
Save yourself.
Well, I also think when you come into a church setting, I mean, even with talking with the leaders, the elders, that, just saying, everybody knows there's going to be problems. I mean, it's better to just face it head on, but to say, when there are, I'd like my wife to be able to be brought in and heard. And so when something, so that's already set as a, what do we say? It's just something that's going to be counted on. It's not going to be like all these things are going on and she's just home and nobody ever talks to her about it. So that she could be brought in to be heard. I know in one church we've tried the thing of even that there would be like an elder who's meeting and talking with the wife just constantly to see how she's doing, checking up with her, how things are going.
Oh, man.
Let's see, what are some others that? Oh, I know one thing. Not when our kids are really young, but as they get older, I know we've gone to them just to ask them what they're experiencing. What is it? What has life been like for them with their dad being a pastor? And it's interesting to hear what kids say. Kids will usually tell you. I used to worry so much about how they were doing, and a lot of times they were doing great. I was just worried.
Yeah, right.
So those are, and then here's another thing too. Like if a wife is going through a really hard time, it's so encouraging to say to her, "Hey, why don't you go to another church for a while?" So if a husband could say that to her, say, "We're going through a really tough time at our church. I am getting, whatever's happening." Maybe encourage her to go, down the road to another place for a while.
It's probably not politically. Well, you can have her make an obscene gesture as she walks out the door or something.
But those are things like, even like I'll say to women too, I go, "Well, how often are you not at church? Do you ever," just like when a guy will take off from preaching, he might not preach all the time. It's a thing to say, "Hey, take a break." Especially if she's super involved or there's, difficulties, I think why not do that?
Yeah, that's such good advice.
Shari, you talked about the burden that you were carrying that got you out of ministry in the first place. And you talked about the revelation of this message that it's not up to us to please God, that he's already pleased, and we don't have to do anything to, show that we're worthy, or, the message. So how does that apply in the relationship between the pastor and his wife? I mean, how can that message be transformative, not just in the life of the church, as we've been talking about, how can she be incorporated into this position, but how at home can radical grace and the unconditional love of God, how can that transform their relationship?
I'm laughing because I was hoping you wouldn't ask that.
Because it doesn't transform the relationship. Is that what you're telling me?
It's worse.
And we're just faking it,
No,
man.
Well, that's actually what I asked my husband on Sunday. We were hashing through all of this, talking about all this. We had all the theological terms out there, and I said, okay, make that practical. When you and I are arguing over whose turn it is to do dishes, how do you apply this?
Boy, that's calling him out.
Well, or call it out on me. And what we were saying is so much. I don't think we really understand our own stories well enough to know why we butt heads all the time in marriage. So, how to make it practical? Like somebody said to me once, they go, okay, I could sit there and go, I know Jesus was abandoned for me. I know he was betrayed for me. But when someone betrays me, I want to pull out the gun.
Yeah.
So I would say some of the things that we're learning in our marriage is, okay, why does just those three, betrayal, abandonment, powerlessness, what's happened in our past that whenever we feel just a tinge of somebody maybe going to betray us, we lose it. There's something that's gone on in our past, and I don't think that's where I would say that we haven't let the cross, it hasn't washed back yet over those experiences. So that's just a journey I would encourage people to be on, to just look even at your own story in life, because the evil one has really tripped us up. To believe lies, to try to set it up so that we will never have a good relationship with our husband. So those are areas that I know just for us in our relationship, we're looking at, and we keep talking it through. But one little thing we do say to each other, don't Bible beat each other.
What does that mean?
So,
Good.
well, you know how it's, especially in ministry families, it's so easy to come out and go, well, you're sure not living in grace,
Oh,
They make a law out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when we're struggling to go, okay, we're humans. I've got to accept that.
Well,
Go ahead.
well, what you're saying, to relate it back to what Eric was asking, is that grace makes it possible to kiss the demons on the lips, to say, this really sucks. I don't like what's going on here, and we need to talk about it. Whereas the Christian way, without understanding the radical nature of grace, is to deny it, to stuff it, and to smile and be nice.
Yeah, and pretend.
Yeah.
And that creates so much pressure. We were talking about this here in the office. Well, what does that look like? How is grace transformative? I mean, and really what it comes down to is you get to just have a normal life without the ticking time bomb.
Yeah.
It's not all about bringing it back to having some kind of significance, or having some kind of effect on the world, or improving in some way, or pleasing God in some way. I mean, the bomb's diffused. You can relax, and just that relaxing helps a relationship, and at least I've seen in my life, helps relationships grow, because they're free to do this kind of journeying together into the dark places, but also to express yourself without fear of God striking you down, or people kicking you out.
Yeah.
Well, or fear of your husband,
right.
Being mad at you, because it's like you have the love of the Father, so you can speak truth.
Yeah.
And without being fear if you're going to leave each other. I mean, that could happen, but we have the love of the Father, and that's what we have to cling to.
This comes back around, and I don't want you to, tell us exactly what you're going to say if you have written it yet, or you're thinking about it for Liberate. But the subject you're going to be speaking about, you're taking that theme, it's finished, and then you're going to be applying it to relationships. Talk to us a little bit about that. Maybe that's what you're saying, Eric, too, is that I got to recognize that this is not a standard anybody has to live up to. It's finished. So that means you're a sinner, and that you blow it some, and you say stupid things, and sometimes you're selfish and ego driven, and me too, and that's covered. So let's go to a movie or something or whatever. Talk to us about how it can be finished in a biblical Jesus sense, and how that affects relationships. You haven't
Maybe
written
we
this
should
yet,
ask-
have you?
I was going to say for me.
The manuscript's
Eric,
not finished.
why don't you speak?
Why don't I speak? Nobody invited me. I'm happy to talk.
Well, where I was wanting to go with it, though, is even starting out with the whole thing of a journey towards honesty.
Yeah.
Because, okay, I won't go into what all the pieces will be, but basically I was thinking of just the whole thing of a journey towards honesty, and then one about a journey towards understanding and seeing our true identity.
Yeah. And seeing that in others.
And I'm going to float. Pardon?
And seeing that in others.
Right. And so there comes to be, I don't think we don't accept others when we don't accept ourselves.
Yeah.
So we haven't really understood the acceptance of the Father. So the whole true identity, like one thing I think is with, we've taken utter depravity sometimes to a place of thinking, about forgetting that we're created in God's image. Yeah. So even what that looks like, being created in God's image, and how it's going to look different in each person. So anyway, coming to that understanding, coming to it, accepting it, but also looking at reinterpreting our own stories through the lens of redemption, how that then impacts our relationships. So, because I know I'll be even the one to say to my husband, okay, if it's finished, how come this is so hard? And so often I look at, well, it's finished, therefore it's not going to be hard. Mm-hmm. Well, we're living in the here but not yet of history, and so we're looking forward to when this will be. I mean, it was completed on the cross, and yet it doesn't mean that because it's finished, it's going to be so easy. And that's the part I keep wrestling with myself. I want it to be easy. I don't want to suffer.
But the fact that it's finished makes it doable, right?
Yes. And that's the only reason it's doable.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Otherwise, I'm going to constantly be, and I do, because I'm a leaky sieve. I constantly go back to thinking I have to fix myself, and that's the part I have to go back and go. No, you don't.
Yeah.
Christ has completed that work.
So, Shari, as you're dealing with pastors' wives, are you finding that more and more women are getting that, understanding their identity separate in a sense from their husband or the role in the church, and getting healed and getting set free? Are you finding that more and more? Are our pastoral families getting healthier, do you think?
Well, we're working with a small number of people because it's not just like a conference, it's ongoing. We have groups, we have coachings, but what I am hearing, I've gotten letters from pastors going, what happened to my wife? Mm-hmm. She's come home, she's a different person.
That's good or bad?
Yeah, she just left our church. What the heck?
Yeah.
She's wearing weird clothes, and
she just keeps swinging and swinging. She's on the beach all the time. What the heck?
Well, they're saying it's great. Sometimes it's hard because she may not continue to keep all the ministries going.
Yeah.
But still, what guys are saying, I've got my wife back. The wife that I married, I've gotten her back.
Because she's re-engaging, it sounds like, right?
Right. She's who she is. She's not like, let's say, an introvert trying to pretend she's an extrovert, meeting with everybody. She's able to say, oh, that's not really who I am. This is a better fit here for me, this other area. But I think, too, what I could just say from what my husband experienced was, I was a workhorse. I was going all the time. So as this truth sinks in, I can rest. He actually finds that we can go out and do things together. I'm not the one who's always pushing to be in the church, be in ministry. I know that's really different from a lot of women. But so those are the things that change. Those are the things that we're hearing reports on. So yes, it is good change.
And it's really a picture of what happened with you, of sanctification and growth that comes from this relaxation, and even arguing with God and kicking against him, and then finding that your identity and that you're loved unconditionally. And then it's so exciting. You actually want to go tell people about it. And then you're
Right.
in ministry, but it's dynamic, and it's something there's so much new life, and the Spirit is in it, the Spirit of freedom.
Exactly. And I think, and that's where my husband had to come to, was being willing to let go of being in ministry or of being a pastor until I was ready to be with him in it. And that was a great gift he gave me. But then again, going back to it is finished, the reason we can argue with God is because we know he loves us. You don't really argue with somebody unless you feel, true arguing, unless you feel free enough. Right? So that's the beauty of it. It's not because, we're shaking our fists at God. It's because we know he loves us, that we can go back and go, I don't understand this.
It takes a lot of faith in the gospel to do that.
Yeah.
Because everybody tells you you're wrong.
Otherwise, you'd be scared.
Yeah, you have to. That brings me to a thing that we try to do here in this ministry in a great variety of ways. We try to teach in a propositional sense, a theological and biblical sense, the doctrines of grace. I'm not talking about the Reformed doctrines of grace, but the doctrines of grace, that what we've been talking about. But also the other side of that is to try to model it. Shari, I don't know anybody who does that better than you do. It's not that you just teach. You are, you're who you are. And so it's not just listen to the teaching, but watch me. What kind of reaction, and I know this may make you uncomfortable, but how do people react to you? Do they react to that teaching and that modeling by saying, thank God I can do this? Or do they get angry or what? Talk to us about your relationship with people from the ministry that you have.
Well, basically, when I teach with my colleague Tammy, who is everything the opposite of me. And one of the reasons that we do that, in such a great way, one of the reasons we do that as a team is so that women can see you don't have to look like me. You don't have to look like Tammy. Who are you? And so the reason we do it together is so that they can see freedom is going to look different in each person. And that's where I hear women getting excited. And they've often said, wow, if I had just heard it from one of you, there's usually someone in the group going, well, that's not me. So when it's together, when we present together, it really helps women go, well, I wonder, who am I really? What might I look like as I experience this type of freedom?
That's so good.
So, and I will say, when it's a really conservative area, I'll send Tammy.
That's called being as wise as a serpent and as innocent as a dove. Hey, we're moving kind of to the end of this, and I'm sure you guys have. You've got some other things you want to bring up quickly, or we can join hands and sing "Kumbaya" or something if you want to. Other things that you were thinking, but we haven't brought up.
Well, I've got something just as I love what you were saying about looking at our story, and there's a lot of in our reactions to things that we can go back to our past and see that the cross, we haven't retold ourselves that story in light of the cross, in light of it's finished, in light of what Jesus has done. But I think at least for me, some of the hang up of that in doing this work is that is a great process for me to go through. But as I'm going through that process, there's still so much expectation of the people that are under, that you're leading, that you're ministering to. How would you advise someone as they're walking through this stuff to lead well without losing. I mean, every week I think I'm going to lose my job. As soon as I start opening my mouth and talk about what God's actually really doing in my heart, I always think I'm going to lose my job. And so I guess I just would love some insight on, as you walk through this process, there's also a sense, because you're called as the leader of the church, to also bring them along that path, but they might not be in the same place as you, and you might have to go a little bit slower for those you're leading, for them to be able to really hear it.
Mm-hmm. And that's very wise, because I know John and I were so excited about this that we in many situations we went too fast when people weren't ready, and it was maybe not the best way to go about it. But I think one thing, though, this may not be the answer that you want, but I do think we have to really ask what's at the bottom of why are we so afraid to lose our jobs? And I'm not saying this in just be radical for radical's sake, but we have to look at, okay, why I don't want that to be the biggest thing that drives me. Because when it does, it's going to get me off track, and I'm going to be basically pleasing man rather than pleasing God.
Yeah, and
I've got a pregnant wife, though. I need my health insurance.
I always felt I didn't want this job anyway, and go ahead and push, and I'll leave and get a bottle of champagne and celebrate. Eric, you had some things you wanted to say really quickly.
Sherry, did you want to follow up before I go on?
I was joking.
Well, I was just going to say, though, it is smart to find safe people.
Yeah.
As we're going through the process. Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, I got a text here. It's a question for Sherry. Is there advice for Christian married couples who are ministering but not in church?
I'd probably have to know more about what it means.
Yeah.
What the context is.
Is it more like a parachurch?
Sounds like it. Yeah, it sounds like it.
Well, I would think the principles, though, are the same regardless of where we are.
Yeah.
But I would have to hear, more of what the situation was.
And I have another one here that says, what does Parakaleo offer for pastors' wives in terms of training? And I think for both of those questions, if you go to parakaleo.us, you can start to see, what do they offer, and then how could that apply to people that are ministering together but outside of church? I mean, beyond what we discussed here today.
Yeah.
So, sorry I didn't get to those quicker, but we're kind of running out of time here.
Oh, yeah, we are. Sherry, boy, this hour went fast. Mm-hmm. You're fun to be around. You know that? Thanks for doing
time flies.
Thank you.
And listen, don't you ever shilly-shally. You keep doing it the way you're doing, because that means a lot to a lot of us to see that you do that. In what I was talking about, you not only teach it, you model it, and we're glad. And are you looking forward to Liberate? Have you been there before?
I haven't. This will be my first time.
Oh, man,
so I'm
you're gonna
really
love
excited about it.
You're going to love it, and they're going to love you too. So it's going to be a great mix, and you'll be glad.
And for you watching, you're going to love it. Liberate2015.com. There's special pricing available till December 14th. If you're a pastor, there's the Key Life Pastors Pre-Conference. Definitely join us for that as we kick off Liberate 2015. All the information's at Liberate2015.com. And I do want to mention before we go that the next chat is going to be with Steve and Paul Zoll, and we're shooting to have that up at keylife.org Tuesday, January 27th.
That's two old guys sitting around telling war stories, and it's going to be a fun time.
If you want a little flavor of that, go to keylife.org and look on the Steve Brown Etc. page. We had him on the talk show. One of my favorite programs ever was Steve and Paul Zoll dishing out the gospel goodness.
Sherry, you're great, and thank you so much for taking an hour. You're one of the busiest people I know, so an hour is
not.
Yeah, you are. The grace thing didn't take gasoline out of your tank, gave you more. And Sherry, we appreciate you big. Thanks for spending this time with us.
Thank you.
All right, guys, that's it. I'm going to go get a smoke in this little. You can do whatever you want to do.
I'm going back to the beer box.
As long as there's a TV.
Hey, God bless you, and thanks for joining us.